We are in Chapter 6 of the Manipulated Mind, and this is video number 4. That obedience is so deeply entrenched is further illustrated by another experiment of Milgram's, this time demonstrating just how difficult it is to breach social norms, regardless of authority figures, to reinforce them. Milgram asked one of his students to go up to a person sitting on a subway train and request that person to give up his seat to him, without giving an explanation as to why. The student was supposed to repeat this performance on 20 different occasions and gauge the reactions of the people he asked. But the student backed out before he had finished because, he said, the assignment was one of the most difficult things he had ever had to do in his life. So Milgram decided to take over himself, and he soon came to understand his student's unexpected reaction. He approached a passenger on a train and then found himself sweating before he could even speak. When he finally forced out his request, he experienced extreme panic. But the man did surrender his seat. In Milgram's words, taking the man's seat, I was overwhelmed by the need to behave in a way that would justify my request. My head sank between my knees, and I could feel my face blanching. I was not role-playing. I actually felt as if I were going to perish. As soon as I got off the train, all tension disappeared. That was from Psychology Today, June 1975. When the rules have been set, we feel difficulty in disobeying them unless we have massive peer support, which leads us on to the equally potent power of conformity. Conformity. People cannot be trusted to say and do what they think is right if others around them are expressing an opposite opinion. The pull towards social conformity is far too strong. That was the finding of psychologist Solomon Asch's now celebrated study. He showed subjects a thick 8-inch line drawn on one piece of card and asked them to say which of 3 other lines on another piece of card was the same length as the first. The other card showed a line that was obviously longer than the first, a line that was quite obviously shorter, and a line that was clearly identical. But very few subjects chose the identical line. Asch had so arranged things that the test involved several subjects at once, but only one subject was genuinely being tested. The others were confederates of the experimenter, and all had been primed to give the same wrong answers. Asch found that his real subject, given the choice of sticking with his own judgment and being the odd one out, or waiving his judgment and concurring with his co-subject's clearly wrong answers, opted to do the latter thing and conform. Nearly 3/4 of his subjects showed some tendency to conform to the view expressed by the others in the room. In interviews afterwards, it was made quite clear by the subjects that they hadn't believed the chosen line was the same length as the first line. In Asch's experiment, there were no penalties being meted out for being wrong, even so mild as a frown. So it is impossible to infer that in a situation where there might be some form of disapproval shown to a dissenter, conformity would be even higher. Conformity was found to occur only if there was more than one confederate giving wrong answers. Similarly, when there were several confederates and one of them gave the correct answer, thus dissenting from his peers, the subject reverted to his own judgment and gave the correct answer too. Having one supporter was sufficient to eliminate the strong conformity drive. Zimbardo suggests, in Influencing Attitudes and Changing Behavior, that pressure towards uniformity may operate directly on opinions or indirectly by changing the way we perceive the world. As an example, he describes an experiment by Sheriff that was based around the fact that a stationary light seen in the dark will appear to move if there is nothing to judge it against. Sheriff asked students the direction and distance that a stationary light appeared to them to move. This varied from individual to individual, some seeing small, limited movements, others lengthy, complicated movements. However, When all the students were gathered together to watch the light and to state what they saw, one after another, a group norm developed that fell between what any of the students as individuals had seen. Those who had described very small movements increased the movements they saw, and those who had seen the large sweeping movements reduced them. The need to be one with the group, to have group approval and therefore social approval, means that individuals will very often change their attitudes themselves to fit with the norm instead of having to be persuaded, just as an authority figure only needs to identify himself, not exert his influence, in order to command obedience. So a group may only have to be known to hold different views from a newcomer to that group for the newcomer to revise his own stance accordingly. The passive power exerted by social norms is all the stronger than overt power because it is bowed to unconsciously. One reason for the strength of the drive to conform is that we tend to learn to cope in unfamiliar social situations by following what others do. We pick up from others the accepted social code of behavior for the circumstances we are in. Imitative behavior is a process of learning. It can also become a habit. Psychologist Irving Janis introduced a term which has now become a modern colloquialism, groupthink. He found that in group decision-making, the pressure for consensus is so strong that it can inhibit any expression of dissent. Particularly likely to succumb to the dangers of groupthink, he said, are tightly knit groups where morale is high. The enthusiasm of the members can lead to an illusion of invulnerability. Whatever decision is made must be the right one because they made it. Any evidence that throws doubt on the validity of the course proposed is rationalized out of the equation. The group comes to believe in its own intrinsic morality, therefore there is no need to give consideration to any moral consequences of acts they propose to carry out. The group decided it, therefore it is moral. In other words, the group comes to have a momentum of its own, fostered by the strength of seemingly united spirit. It is difficult for someone who has any reservations about the decision being made to put himself out of bounds of the inclusive bonds of the group. Group norms can easily be established and adhered to even when the individuals who make up that group have no connection with each other, no common purpose, and don't even know who each other are. Bystander behavior was first studied by John Darley and Bibb Latane after a now notorious incident that hit the headlines in America. A woman was stabbed to death in the doorway to the building where she lived, and 38 people witnessed the killing. The murder took half an hour, and yet none of the onlookers came to her help or even summoned the police. Latane and Darley carried out a large number of experiments using thousands of subjects to test out what it was that prevented people from coming forward to help in such emergencies. They concluded that the onlookers of the above-mentioned murder were not callous or indifferent. They were caught up in a condition the researchers called crowd behavior, where responsibility to act becomes diffuse. They came to their conclusions from experimental findings such as the following. On a number of occasions, a small number of students were asked to sit in a room and fill out some forms. The students didn't know each other. After a little while, smoke started billowing under the door. Only in 38% of the student groups did at least one person get up to investigate. When a student was left alone in the room and saw smoke, in 3/4 of cases the student would get up and investigate within 4 minutes. The researchers found that crowd behavior didn't just apply when people in a group didn't know each other. A number of students were invited to bring 2 friends to take part in an experiment with them. Each trio were told to sit in a room and fill out questionnaires. While they were sitting there, they could hear the experimenter moving around in the next room. Suddenly there was a crash and they could hear her calling out in pain. The same scenario was repeated with just one student sitting in the room. The researchers found that there were half as many responses to the cry when people were with their friends than when they were alone. Darley and Latane were led generally to conclude that when an individual is alone and an emergency occurs, he must act because there is no one else to take responsibility for him. And I have to stop it right there so I don't run out of time. And we will pick this up in the next video being part 5 of chapter 6, Attitude Influence of The Manipulated Mind by Denise Wynn. So I'll see you there. Don't go away.